It was the coldest night Seoul had seen in years. A wealthy Korean CEO stood alone in the freezing rain after losing everything in a single night. Not a poverty, but a betrayal. Hundreds of people walked past him without a second glance. Then, a young Nigerian street vendor selling roasted corn did something no one else dared to do. She offered him the only blanket she owned. By sunrise, a secret would be uncovered that would leave an entire corporation and all of Seoul in shock. Stay until the end, because this story proves that one act of kindness can change two lives forever. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Afrokorea Seoul Stories, the home of unforgettable African-Korean love stories filled with emotion, sacrifice, unexpected twists, family, hope, and second chances. If you enjoy heartfelt stories where kindness overcomes prejudice and love crosses cultures, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Now, let's begin today's emotional journey. The icy wind swept through the streets of Seoul as Joy Adeyemi, a kind-hearted Nigerian woman in her mid-20s, arranged freshly roasted corn and sweet potatoes on a small roadside cart. She had moved from Nigeria 3 years earlier, chasing a better future. Life had been anything but easy. She worked from sunrise until late into the night, sending most of her earnings back home to support her widowed mother and younger siblings. Despite the hardships, Joy had one rule: never ignore someone in need. Just a few streets away, Chairman Kang Ji-hoon, the respected CEO of one of Korea's largest technology companies, stepped out an emergency board meeting. Within 2 hours, his closest business partners had betrayed him. His own cousin had forged documents. The board had voted him out of the company he had spent 25 years building. The media had already begun calling him a failed businessman. For the first time in decades, Kang Ji-hoon had nowhere to go. As freezing rain soaked his expensive suit, he wanted the quiet streets without realizing he was heading toward Joy's tiny food cart. The freezing rain grew heavier as people hurried past with umbrellas held tightly above their heads. No one noticed a tall man standing alone in the shadows, his soaked suit clinging to his body. No one except Joy Okafor. She looked up from her small roadside corn stand and frowned. The man didn't look homeless. His expensive shoes, designer watch, and tailored suit told a different story. Yet there he stood, shivering, staring into the distance as if the world had ended. Joy wrapped another roasted corn for a customer before glancing back at him. He hadn't moved. Something inside her wouldn't let her ignore him. Leaving her stand for a moment, she picked up a steaming cup of hot ginger tea and walked toward him. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "You look freezing. Please have this." The man slowly turned his head. His sharp features and tired eyes showed the pain he was trying to hide. "I don't have money," he replied quietly. Joy smiled. "I'm not selling it to you." He hesitated. "I said it's free." After several seconds, he accepted the cup. The warmth spread through his hands, but what touched him more was a kindness in the young woman's voice. He hadn't experienced kindness all day, not from his business partners, not from his relatives, not even from friends who had promised to stand beside him forever. "I'm Joy," she said with a gentle smile. The man looked at her before answering. "Lee Min-jae." Neither of them realized that before sunrise, their lives would become forever connected. A powerful gust of wind swept across the street. Joy noticed that Lee Min-jae was trembling uncontrollably. Without thinking twice, she removed the thick wool blanket she kept behind her cart for cold nights. "You'll catch pneumonia if you stay like this," she said. He looked at the blanket and then at her. "And what about you?" Joy laughed softly. "I've survived colder nights than this." For the first time that terrible day, Lee Min-jae smiled. It was a small smile, but it was the first crack in the wall of pain surrounding his heart. Just then, 3 black luxury SUVs slowly entered the street. They stopped directly in front of Joy's tiny food cart. Men in dark suits quickly stepped out. Joy's heart skipped a beat. Had she unknowingly helped the wrong man? Or was the truth about Lee Min-jae far more extraordinary than she could ever imagine? The engines of the 3 black SUVs fell silent. Rain continued to pour as 6 men in dark suits hurried toward Joy's roadside cart. One of them, an older man with silver hair, stopped the moment he saw Lee Min-jae. His eyes filled with relief. "President Lee," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. "We've been searching for you all night." Joy froze. "President?" She looked at the soaked man standing beside her. Just moments ago, he had accepted a free cup of tea because he claimed he had no money. The older man continued, his voice shaking. "Sir, everyone at the company is waiting. We must leave immediately." Lee Min-jae remained silent. "I am no longer your president," he said quietly. "The board made that clear." The men lowered their heads. "No, sir," the older man replied. "The emergency audit has just been completed. The truth has come out." Lee Min-jae slowly looked up. "What truth?" "The documents used to remove you were forged. Your cousin and 2 board members confessed after investigators uncovered the fraud. The police have already issued arrest warrants." Joy gasped softly. So he had been telling the truth all along. He wasn't an ordinary businessman. He was the victim of a carefully planned betrayal. The older man continued. "The shareholders have called an emergency meeting. They are begging you to return before the stock market opens. If you don't, the company may collapse." Lee Min-jae closed his eyes. Only a few hours earlier, the same people had abandoned him without listening to his side of the story. Now they wanted him back. He turned toward Joy. She quietly stood behind her small cart, pretending not to listen. "You believe me," he said. Joy smiled gently. "I didn't know who you were. I only knew you looked like someone who needed help." Those simple words struck Lee Min-jae harder than any business deal ever had. All his life, people had respected his wealth, his position, and his power. Joy had shown him kindness when she believed he had none of those things. For the first time in years, he realized what genuine compassion looked like. Before getting into the SUV, he reached into his pocket, but it was empty. He had left his wallet behind during the chaos at headquarters. "I can't repay you today," he admitted. Joy laughed. "I wasn't expecting payment." Lee Min-jae nodded. "Then allow me to make you one promise." "What promise?" "I will come back." Joy smiled politely, assuming she would never see him again. As the SUVs drove away into the rainy Seoul night, Joy returned to her cart and continued serving customers. She had no idea that the man she had helped would soon return, not as a stranger in need, but as someone determined to change her life forever. 3 days passed. Life returned to normal for Joy Okafor. Every morning before sunrise, she pushed her small food cart to the same busy street in Seoul. She roasted corn, sweet potatoes, and chestnuts with a smile, greeting every customer warmly. The mysterious man she had helped on that rainy night never crossed her mind for long. "He probably forgot about me," she whispered to herself. After all, people like Lee Min-jae lived in a completely different world. At the headquarters of Hanseon Group, Lee Min-jae had officially been reinstated as president. The employees welcomed him with thunderous applause. The board members who betrayed him were arrested, while the remaining executives publicly apologized for doubting him. But despite regaining his position, one thought refused to leave his mind. The young Nigerian woman who had shared her only blanket with a stranger. One evening, he called his loyal secretary. "Mr. Choi." "Yes, sir." "I need you to find someone." The secretary opened his notebook. "Her name is Joy Okafor. She runs a small roasted corn cart near Maple Bridge. I don't need a report about her finances or immigration records." Lee added firmly, "I only want to know one thing. Is she doing well?" The secretary looked surprised. It was the first time the president had ever asked about someone's well-being before asking about their background. The following afternoon, a sleek black luxury sedan pulled up beside Joy's food cart. Customers stepped aside, whispering among themselves. The rear door opened. Out stepped Lee Min-jae, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. He walked straight toward Joy with a warm smile. Joy blinked in surprise. "You actually came back." "I made you a promise," he replied, "and I always keep my promises." He placed a small paper bag on the counter. "I brought something for you." Joy opened it carefully. Inside was a brand new pair of warm winter gloves, a thick wool scarf, and insulated boots. She looked at him, speechless. "I noticed your hands were freezing that night," he said. "These won't repay your kindness. But I hope they'll make your work a little easier. Joy's eyes became moist. No one had ever paid such close attention to the little things she endured every day. Before she could thank him, a luxury car screeched to a halt across the street. A glamorous woman wearing an elegant designer coat stepped out. She marched toward Joy, her expression cold and furious. Stopping in front of the food cart, she looked Joy up and down with open disdain. Then she turned to Lee Min-jae. "So this is the woman you've been visiting?" Her voice was sharp enough to silence everyone nearby. Joy had no idea who the woman was, but the way Lee Min-jae's face suddenly hardened told her this encounter was about to change everything. The street fell silent. Even the customers waiting for roasted corn stopped talking. The elegant woman folded her arms and stared at Joy with open contempt. "So," she said coldly, "this is the woman everyone in the office has been whispering about." Joy frowned in confusion. "I'm sorry. I think you mistaken me for someone else." The woman ignored her. Instead, she turned to Lee Min-jae. "You disappeared for one night, and now you're spending your afternoons visiting a street vendor? Do you have any idea what the media will say if they see this?" Lee Min-jae's expression remained calm. "That's none of your concern, Soo-jin." Joy finally learned the woman's name, Yoon Soo-jin. She was the daughter of one of Hanseong Group's largest investors, and had been expected by many to marry Lee Min-jae someday. Although no engagement had ever been announced, their families had long encouraged a match. Soo-jin stepped closer to Joy's cart. "How much do you want?" she asked. Joy blinked. "What do you mean?" "Money," Soo-jin replied, pulling out a thick envelope. "Take this and stay away from Mr. Lee." Joy looked at the envelope, then back at Soo-jin. A slow smile appeared on her face. She gently pushed the envelope back. "I'm sorry, but I can't accept money for something I didn't ask for." Soo-jin's eyes narrowed. "You think you're special because you helped him once?" Joy shook her head. "No, I helped someone who looked like he needed help. If it had been anyone else standing there in the rain, I would have done exactly the same." Those words caught everyone by surprise. Even Lee Min-jae couldn't hide the admiration in his eyes. Soo-jin had expected greed. Instead, she found dignity. But her pride wouldn't allow her to accept defeat. She leaned toward Joy and whispered, "This city can be very difficult for foreigners. Be careful." It sounded less like advice and more like a warning. Without another word, Soo-jin turned and walked back to her luxury car. As it sped away, Lee Min-jae looked at Joy with concern. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this." Joy smiled reassuringly. "I've faced harder days than one angry woman." Lee Min-jae couldn't help but laugh. "You really are different." Just then, Joy's phone rang. Her smile faded as she answered. "Hello." The color drained from her face. "What?" She gripped the counter to keep herself from falling. "My mother collapsed?" Tears instantly filled her eyes. The doctor in Nigeria explained that her mother needed urgent surgery, and the amount required was far beyond anything Joy had managed to save. She ended the call with trembling hands. Lee Min-jae stepped closer. "Joy, what's wrong?" Fighting back tears, she whispered, "My mother is in the hospital, and I don't know how I'm going to save her." Lee Min-jae looked at her with quiet determination. At that moment, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Joy stood silently, her phone still trembling in her hands. The sounds of the busy Seoul street faded into the background. All she could hear was the doctor's final sentence. If the surgery is delayed much longer, her condition could become critical. Tears rolled down her cheeks. For 3 years, she had worked tirelessly in Seoul, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and every luxury just to send money home. Yet it still wasn't enough. Lee Min-jae gently handed her a clean handkerchief. "Joy, look at me." She slowly raised her eyes. "You don't have to go through this alone." Joy shook her head. "I appreciate your kindness, but this is my responsibility. My mother has sacrificed everything for me. I can't ask you to carry this burden." Lee Min-jae admired her even more. Even in her darkest moment, she refused to take advantage of anyone. Without another word, he called his secretary. "Mr. Choi." "Yes, President Lee." "I need a private medical jet prepared immediately." The secretary hesitated. A medical jet, sir? I want Joy to travel to Nigeria tonight. And contact the best surgeons available. If her mother's doctors need additional equipment or specialists, Han Seong Group will provide them. Joy's eyes widened. No, I can't accept something this expensive. Lee Min-jae smiled gently. Do you remember what you told me on the night we met? Joy nodded. Never ignore someone in need. You lived by those words when I was a stranger, he said softly. Allow me to live by them now. Joy could no longer hold back her tears. For the first time since leaving Nigeria, she felt that someone truly cared. Not because of what she could offer, but because of who she was. Meanwhile, inside a luxurious penthouse overlooking the Han River, Yoon Soo-jin slammed a glass onto the table. So he is paying for her mother's treatment? She asked angrily. Yes, Miss Yoon. One of her assistants replied nervously. Soo-jin's face darkened. No, I won't let this continue. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. When the person answered, she spoke only one sentence. I have a job for you. A slow smile spread across her face. Make sure Joy Okafor never boards that plane. Far away, Joy was packing a small suitcase, completely unaware that someone had already begun plotting against her. The journey home, meant to save her mother, was about to become far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. Joy hurried back to her tiny apartment, her heart pounding. She packed only the essentials, a few clothes, her passport, family photographs, and a small notebook where she had written every amount of money she had sent home over the past 3 years. She paused for a moment and looked at a picture of her mother. Please wait for me, Mama, she whispered. I'm coming. At Han Seong Group headquarters, Lee Min-jae had already arranged everything. The private jet was fueled. The hospital in Nigeria had received payment for the emergency surgery. A team of specialists was standing by to assist the local doctors if needed. Mr. Choi entered the office. Sir, everything is ready. Lee Min-jae nodded. Good. Just as they were about to leave, his phone rang. It was an anonymous caller. He answered. A distorted voice spoke calmly. If Joy Okafor reaches Nigeria, someone will regret it. The line went dead. Lee Min-jae immediately stood up. Mr. Choi. Yes, sir. Increase security around Joy. Don't let her travel alone. Within seconds, several trusted security officers were dispatched to escort her. Meanwhile, Joy stepped out of her apartment building carrying her small suitcase. She smiled as she saw the security team waiting. Mr. Lee really thinks of everything, she said quietly. One of the guards opened the car door. Miss Joy will take you safely to the airport. As the convoy drove through Seoul, a black van began following them from a distance. Inside the van, 2 men exchanged glances. That's her. The boss said not to hurt her. Just make sure she doesn't get on that plane. Traffic suddenly came to a standstill. A truck had broken down, blocking the road. The convoy slowed. Without warning, the black van accelerated and swerved in front of Joy's vehicle. Several masked men jumped out. One smashed the front windshield with a metal bar. Another reached for the rear door. The security officers reacted instantly. Protect Miss Joy. A fierce struggle erupted in the middle of the street as frightened pedestrians ran for safety. Joy's heart raced. She had never imagined that helping a stranger on a rainy night would one day put her own life in danger. Then, above the chaos, another voice rang out. Stop. Everyone turned. Lee Min-jae had arrived. He stepped out of his car and walked straight toward the attackers without hesitation. The masked men looked at one another in shock. Their target was no longer just Joy. Now they had to face the man they had underestimated. And none of them realized that one of the attackers was secretly working for someone much closer to Lee Min-jae than anyone suspected. The street was filled with chaos. Car horns blared. Pedestrians scattered in every direction. Rainwater mixed with shattered glass on the pavement. Lee Min-jae stood between Joy and the masked men. His voice was calm but commanding. Leave now. The attackers hesitated. Their leader swung a metal bar toward one of the security officers, hoping to create enough confusion to escape. Within seconds, more security personnel arrived. The masked men realized they had lost the advantage. Retreat! Their leader shouted. They jumped back into black van and sped away before the police arrived. Joy's hands were trembling. Lee Min-jae gently placed his coat over her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, thanks to your security team." Lee looked at the damaged car and frowned. "This wasn't random." Mr. Choi nodded. They knew Miss Joy's exact route and departure time. Someone had leaked confidential information. That meant the attack had been planned by someone with access to Lee Min-jae's inner circle. Later that evening, security cameras from nearby buildings were reviewed. One frame caught everyone's attention. Just before the attack, one of the masked men had received a phone call. When investigators enhanced the footage, they identified the number. Mr. Choi rushed into Lee Min-jae's office. "Sir, we've traced the call." Lee looked up. "Who made it?" Mr. Choi placed a file on the desk. The name on the first page made Lee's expression change instantly. Yoon Soo-jin. Lee couldn't believe it. He immediately drove to Soo-jin's family estate. She welcomed him with a confident smile. "I knew you'd come." Lee placed the investigation file on the table. "Were you behind today's attack?" Soo-jin looked at the photographs. Then she laughed. "I only wanted to delay her trip." "You call armed men attacking an innocent woman a delay?" Her smile disappeared. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" "From throwing your future away for someone you'll never belong with." Lee Min-jae's eyes hardened. "You've crossed a line, Soo-jin. For years, I respected our family's friendship. But after today, we're finished." Those words hit Soo-jin harder than she expected. She realized she hadn't pushed Joy away. She had pushed Lee Min-jae away. Meanwhile, Joy finally arrived at the private airport under heavy security. The jet's engines were already running. She looked back toward the city skyline. She silently prayed, "Please let me reach my mother in time." As she climbed the stairs into the aircraft, her phone rang again. It was the hospital in Nigeria. Joy answered immediately. The doctor's voice sounded urgent. "Miss Joy, there has been a new development." Joy's heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" The doctor took a deep breath before speaking. "Your mother has regained consciousness. And the first thing she asked for was you." Joy burst into tears of relief. But she had no idea that an even bigger family secret was waiting for her in Nigeria, one that her mother had hidden for more than 25 years. The private jet soared above the clouds as Joy sat quietly by the window. For the first time in years, she was finally going home. She held the old family photograph close to her chest. "Please stay strong, Mama," she whispered. Across the aisle, Lee Min-jae watched her silently. He had decided to accompany her to Nigeria. Not as the president of Hanseon Group, but as a friend who refused to let her face such a difficult moment alone. Joy looked at him in surprise. "You didn't have to come." Lee smiled. "I know, but I wanted to." Joy lowered her eyes, deeply moved. Several hours later, the aircraft landed in Lagos, Nigeria. A convoy of vehicles was already waiting to take them to the hospital. As they drove through the bustling streets, Lee Min-jae gazed out the window with curiosity. Children laughed as they played football on dusty fields. Street vendors called out to customers. Music drifted through the warm afternoon air. "It's beautiful," Lee said softly. Joy smiled proudly. "This is home." When they arrived at the hospital, Joy ran through the corridors. She pushed open the ward door. "Mama!" Her mother, Mrs. Grace Okafor, slowly opened her eyes. Despite looking weak, she smiled the moment she saw her daughter. "My Joy." Joy rushed forward and embraced her carefully. "I thought I was going to lose you," Joy cried. Mrs. Okafor gently wiped away her tears. "No, my daughter. God still has a purpose for me." She then noticed Lee Min-jae standing respectfully near the door. Joy introduced him. "Mama, this is Mr. Lee Min-jae. He's the one who helped me get home." Mrs. Okafor looked at him with gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter." Lee bowed politely. "It has been an honor." That evening, after the doctors completed another round of examinations, Mrs. Okafor asked to speak with Joy alone. Lee quietly stepped outside. The room became silent. Mrs. Okafor reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small wooden box. It looked old, worn, and carefully protected over the years. She placed it in Joy's hands. I have kept this for more than 25 years. Joy looked confused. What is it? Something that belongs to you. With trembling fingers, Joy opened the box. Inside were a faded photograph, an old letter, and a small gold pendant. She picked up the photograph first. Her eyes widened. It showed her mother as a young woman, standing beside an unfamiliar Korean man. Joy looked up in disbelief. Mama? Who is this? Tears filled Mrs. Okafor's eyes. She took a deep breath before finally speaking the truth she had hidden for decades. My daughter, before I married your father, I once saved the life of a young Korean engineer. Joy's heart pounded. He promised that if fate ever brought our families together again, he would repay that kindness. Mrs. Okafor looked toward the hospital door, where Lee Min-jae was waiting outside, unaware of the conversation. Then she whispered the words that left Joy speechless. The man in that photograph is Lee Min-jae's father. Joy could hardly breathe. Could it really be possible that her meeting with Lee Min-jae on that cold, rainy night in Seoul had never been a coincidence? Joy stared at the faded photograph, unable to speak. Her hands trembled as she looked from the picture to her mother's tear-filled eyes. Mom, are you certain? Mrs. Grace Okafor nodded slowly. I could never forget his face. She gently picked up the old letter from the wooden box. The year was 2001. I was working as a volunteer at a rural health center in eastern Nigeria. One afternoon, there was a terrible road accident. Among the injured was a young Korean engineer who had come to Nigeria to supervise the construction of a community water project. Joy listened in complete silence. Many people were afraid to help because the accident looked so serious. But I couldn't walk away. I stayed beside him until the ambulance arrived. I donated blood when the hospital needed it, and for several days I helped care for him because he had no family in Nigeria. Joy slowly unfolded the old letter. Although the paper had turned yellow with age, the handwriting was still clear. Dear Grace, you saved my life when everyone else had given up on me. One day, if fate allows, I will return this kindness. If our families ever meet again, my family will never forget what you did. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Lee Sung-ho. Joy looked toward the hospital door, where Lee Min-jae was speaking with the doctor. Her heart raced. Could this really be his father? Outside the room, Lee Min-jae had just received another call from Seoul. Mr. Choi sounded worried. Sir, we've uncovered something. What is it? The people who tried to stop Miss Joy from leaving Korea. They weren't acting alone. Lee frowned. What do you mean? We found evidence that someone inside Hanseon Group financed the operation. Lee's expression hardened. Who? We're still confirming the identity. But whoever it is, they're very close to the company's leadership. Lee ended the call. Whoever was behind this hadn't given up. Back inside the hospital room, Mrs. Okafor reached for Joy's hand. My daughter, there is something else. When Mr. Lee recovered from his injuries, he invited me to visit Korea one day. I never went. Why not? Joy asked softly. Mrs. Okafor smiled sadly. Because a few months later, I met your father. He was a good man. I chose love and family over a journey I could no longer make. Joy squeezed her mother's hand. You never regretted it? Never. She smiled warmly. But God has his own way of keeping promises. I never traveled to Korea. Yet, somehow, Korea came to my daughter. At that moment, there was a gentle knock on the door. Lee Min-jae stepped inside. The moment Mrs. Okafor looked into his face again, tears filled her eyes. There was no doubt anymore. He had the same eyes, the same calm expression, the same gentle smile. As the young Korean man whose life she had saved 25 years earlier, she whispered almost to herself, You look just like your father. Lee Min-jae stopped in his tracks. My father? Joy and her mother exchanged a nervous glance. The truth was finally about to be revealed. Lee Min-jae stood frozen at the doorway. My father? He asked quietly. Joy looked at her mother, silently asking for permission. Mrs. Grace Okafor nodded. It's time. Joy handed the old wooden box to Lee. I think you should see this. Lee carefully opened it. His eyes fell on the faded photograph. He picked it up with trembling hands. It showed a much younger version of his father, Lee Sung-ho, standing beside a smiling Nigerian woman. He looked from the photograph to Mrs. Okafor. This is you? Mrs. Okafor smiled gently. Yes. Lee then unfolded the old letter. As he read each line, his breathing grew heavier. He recognized the handwriting instantly. My father wrote this. His voice cracked. I've seen this handwriting in the letters he used to send me when I was studying abroad. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Lee looked at Mrs. Okafor. My father never told me this story. Mrs. Okafor nodded. He was a humble man. He said that kindness shouldn't be advertised. It should simply be remembered. Lee closed his eyes. Suddenly, a childhood memory came rushing back. He was only 10 years old. One rainy evening, his father placed a hand on his shoulder and said, Min-jae, if someone ever saves your life, never repay them with money alone. Repay them with loyalty, respect, and kindness that lasts for generations. At the time, Lee had never understood why those words mattered so much. Now, he finally knew. His father had been talking about Grace Okafor all along. Tears rolled down Lee Min-jae's face. He stood and bowed deeply before Mrs. Okafor, a full 90-degree bow, the deepest sign of respect. Thank you, not only for saving my father's life, but for giving me the chance to meet Joy. Mrs. Okafor gently shook her head. No, my son. That meeting was arranged by God. Joy watched the emotional moment unfold with tears in her eyes. Neither she nor Lee had imagined that a simple act of kindness and soul would uncover a bond that had begun decades earlier in Nigeria. Just then, the hospital room door burst open. Mr. Choi hurried inside, breathing heavily. President Lee? Lee turned immediately. What happened? Mr. Choi looked at Joy and Mrs. Okafor before speaking. Sir, we've identified the person who financed the attack. The room fell silent. Who is it? Lee asked. Mr. Choi swallowed hard. It wasn't Yoon Soo-jin. Everyone stared at him in disbelief. The money came from someone above her, someone who has secretly wanted control of Hanseong Group for years. Lee's face grew pale. Tell me? Mr. Choi spoke the name. It's that your uncle, Lee Dong-chul. Joy's eyes widened. The betrayal that had started in Seoul had reached far deeper than anyone had imagined. And if Lee Dong-chul had orchestrated everything, then Joy and Lee Min-jae were still in grave danger. The heavy silence settled over the hospital room. Lee Min-jae stared at Mr. Choi in disbelief. My uncle? Mr. Choi nodded. We verified the bank records. The money used to hire the attackers came through 3 shell companies. They all lead back to Lee Dong-chul. Joy looked at Lee with concern. She could see the pain in his eyes. First, his cousin had betrayed him. Now his own uncle. Lee slowly sat down, trying to process everything. Why? He whispered. Mr. Choi handed him another file. Because if you remain president of Hanseong Group, he would never become chairman. Lee clenched his fists. So this was never about me personally. It was about power. Thousands of kilometers away in Seoul, Lee Dong-chul sat in his luxurious office, watching the evening news. A reporter announced, President Lee Min-jae has traveled to Nigeria for humanitarian reasons after helping the family of a Nigerian woman who once saved his life. Lee Dong-chul switched off the television in anger. They're praising him again, he muttered. One of his assistants stepped forward nervously. Sir, should we proceed with the next phase? Dong-chul smiled coldly. No. The attack failed, so we'll use a different strategy. He opened a drawer and removed a confidential folder. Inside was a document marked, Hanseong Group, Emergency Shareholder Vote. If I can't destroy Lee Min-jae, I'll remove him legally. Back in Nigeria, Joy walked outside the hospital to clear her mind. The evening breeze was warm. She sat quietly on a bench beneath a flowering tree. A few minutes later, Lee Min-jae joined her. Neither of them spoke at first. Finally, Lee broke the silence. I'm sorry. Joy looked at him. For what? for bringing danger into your life. Joy smiled gently. You didn't. I chose to help a stranger because it was the right thing to do. And if I had to make that choice again, I would still help you. Those words touched Lee more deeply than he could express. He looked at Joy with sincerity. I've met many people in my life. Business partners, politicians, billionaires, but very few people with a heart like yours. Joy laughed softly. My mother always says that wealth can buy comfort, but it can never buy character. Lee smiled. I think your mother is very wise. At that moment, Joy's phone buzzed. It was a head surgeon. Miss Joy, he said excitedly, I have wonderful news. The surgery was a complete success. Your mother is going to recover. Joy covered her mouth as tears of joy streamed down her face. She immediately hugged Lee Min-jae without thinking. For a brief moment, they simply stood there. When Joy realized what she had done, she quickly stepped back, blushing. I'm sorry. Lee smiled warmly. Don't be. It was the happiest hug I've ever received. Both of them laughed. Neither realized that someone across the hospital parking lot had quietly taken several photographs of that embrace. The photographer immediately sent the pictures to an unknown number with a short message. I got exactly what you wanted. A reply came back almost instantly. Excellent. Tomorrow, the whole world will believe they are having a secret affair. The following morning, Seoul woke to explosive news. Every major entertainment and business website carried the same photographs. One image showed Joy hugging Lee Min-jae outside the hospital. Another showed him gently placing his coat over her shoulders. The headlines were sensational. Han Group president in secret romance with Nigerian woman. Business tycoon hides relationship during overseas trip. Within hours, the story spread across social media. Some people celebrated the pair, calling their story inspiring. Others criticized Lee Min-jae, claiming he had let personal feelings interfere with business. In Nigeria, Joy's phone began ringing nonstop. Friends, former co-workers, and even distant relatives want to know if the rumors were true. Joy sighed. This is what I wanted. Lee Min-jae looked at the headlines and calmly placed his phone on the table. They're trying to distract everyone. Joy looked at him. You don't think this is just gossip? He shook his head. No. Someone wants a public focus on my personal life, while something much bigger happens behind the scenes. Just then, Mr. Choi rushed into the hospital waiting room. Sir. Lee stood immediately. What is it? The emergency shareholder meeting has been moved forward. When, in less than 24 hours, Lee's face hardened. So my uncle is making his move. Meanwhile, Lee Dong-chul sat confidently at the head of a long conference table in Seoul. Several influential shareholders were already seated around him. He smiled as he slid a stack of newspapers across the table. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, can a man caught in an international scandal still lead Han Group? Some shareholders exchanged uncertain glances. The rumors had already begun to influence their opinions. Back in Nigeria, Joy entered her mother's hospital room. Mrs. Grace Okafor looked much stronger after the successful surgery. She smiled when she saw Joy. My daughter, why do you look so worried? Joy showed her the news articles. Her mother read them quietly. Then she smiled. People can write whatever they like. What matters is the truth. Joy sat beside her. I'm afraid I'm causing problems for Mr. Lee. Mrs. Okafor gently held her daughter's hand. No, Joy. The people causing problems are those who have chosen lies over truth. She paused before adding, if you truly care about him, don't run away because of fear. Joy looked down silently. Deep inside her heart, she knew something had changed. What began as gratitude had slowly become something much deeper. That evening, Lee Min-jae stood outside the hospital, watching the sunset. Joy walked over and stood beside him. After a long silence, she spoke. If returning to Seoul means facing all of this alone, then you're not going alone. Lee turned to her. What do you mean? Joy smiled with quiet determination. I'll come with you. If people are spreading lies about me, then I won't hide. I'll stand beside the truth. For a moment, Lee couldn't find the right words. Then he smiled. Thank you. Neither of them noticed a familiar black SUV parked across the street. Inside, a man lowered his binoculars and spoke into his phone. They're leaving Nigeria together. A cold voice answered from the other end. Good. Prepare the final plan. This time, Lee Min-jae will lose everything. The next morning, Joy stood at her mother's bedside. Mrs. Grace Okafor looked much healthier. The doctors had confirmed that the surgery was a success, and with proper care, she would make a full recovery. Joy held her mother's hand tightly. I don't want to leave you so soon. Mrs. Okafor smiled. My daughter, you've already done more than enough. She gently touched Joy's cheek. Go. You have unfinished business in Seoul. Joy nodded, though tears filled her eyes. I'll come back as soon as everything is settled. I know you will. Before Joy left the room, her mother whispered, and remember, never let fear decide your future. A few hours later, the private jet lifted off from Lagos. As the plane climbed into the sky, Joy looked out the window one last time. Lee Min-jae noticed the sadness in her eyes. You miss home already? Joy smiled softly. Home isn't just a place. It's where the people you love are. Lee looked at her thoughtfully. That's true. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Lee Dong-chul stood in the grand boardroom of Hanseong Group. Nearly every shareholder had arrived. Television crews gathered outside the building, waiting for the outcome of the emergency meeting. Dong-chul smiled confidently. He won't make it back in time. One shareholder asked, and if he does? Dong-chul's smile widened. Then I'll destroy his reputation before he can speak. Just then, Mr. Choi burst into the boardroom. President Lee's plane has landed. The room erupted into whispers. He made it that Dong-chul's confident expression faded for the first time. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Lee Min-jae stepped out, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Behind him walked Joy, wearing an elegant but modest cream-colored dress that reflected both Nigerian grace and modern Korean style. The room fell silent. Several executives stared at Joy. Some recognized her immediately from the news reports. Whispers spread across the room. That's a Nigerian woman. She's actually here. Dong-chul smiled mockingly. So you brought your latest distraction to a shareholders' meeting. Lee Min-jae remained calm. No. I brought someone who understands integrity better than most people in this room. The shareholders exchanged surprised glances. Dong-chul laughed. Integrity. Can she run a global company? No, Lee replied. But she knows the value of honesty. And that's something money can't buy. The atmosphere grew tense. Just as the meeting was about to begin, the boardroom doors opened once again. An elderly man entered, supported by a cane. Every executive immediately stood up. Even Lee Dong-chul's smile disappeared. Joy leaned toward Mr. Choi and whispered, Who is he? Mr. Choi smiled. That's the founder of Hanseong Group. The man everyone believed had retired permanently. The one person whose voice could change the future of the company with a single sentence. He looked directly at Lee Min-jae, then at Joy, and said, Before this meeting begins, I have a truth that everyone in this room needs to hear. The boardroom became so quiet that even the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. The elderly founder slowly walked to the head of the table. Every executive bowed respectfully. His name carried immense weight in South Korea's business world. For decades, he had built Hanseong Group from a small family business into a global corporation. He looked around the room before finally speaking. I have watched this company for many years. My greatest fear was never competition. It was greed. His eyes settled on Lee Dong-chul. Greed has a way of destroying families before it destroys companies. Lee Dong-chul forced a smile. Brother, with all due respect, this meeting is about choosing the best leader for Hanseong Group. The founder nodded calmly. You're right. It is. He then turned toward Lee Min-jae. When your father, Lee Sung-ho, was alive, he taught me something I have never forgotten. He said, A company should never be led by the richest person in the room. It should be led by the person with the strongest character. The room fell silent again. The founder slowly walked toward Joy. Everyone watched in confusion. He stopped in front of her and smiled warmly. "You must be Joy." Joy bowed respectfully. "Yes, sir." The founder extended his hand. "Thank you." Joy looked surprised. "For what, sir?" "For reminding my grandson what our family once stood for." He turned to the shareholders. "Many of you have been discussing this young woman as though she were a scandal. But do you know the truth?" He held up the faded photograph and the old letter Mrs. Grace Okafor had preserved for 25 years. "My late son, Lee Sung-ho, would not be alive today if it were not for Joy's mother." A wave of astonishment swept across the room. The founder continued. 25 years later, Joy saved my grandson, not from a car accident, but from loneliness, despair, and betrayal." He paused. "Tell me, is kindness now considered a crime?" No one answered. Several shareholders lowered their heads in embarrassment. The founder's voice grew firmer. "The rumors published about these two were created to distract you. They were designed to make you forget the real issue." He turned sharply toward Lee Dong-chul. "The issue is corruption." Lee Dong-chul's face turned pale. He tried to protest. "You have no proof." Before the founder could respond, the boardroom doors opened. Two detectives from the Seoul Metropolitan Police walked in, accompanied by prosecutors carrying sealed evidence boxes. One detective spoke clearly. "Lee Dong-chul, you are under investigation for fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and arranging the attack on Miss Joy Okafor." Gasps echoed through the room. Dong-chul backed away. "This is impossible." The detective calmly produced a recording. "We have testimony from one of the men you hired. He accepted a plea agreement in exchange for telling the truth." The recording played through the boardroom speakers. Everyone heard Lee Dong-chul's voice giving instructions to stop Joy from reaching the airport. There was no denying it. The evidence was overwhelming. The detective stepped forward. "Lee Dong-chul, please come with us." As they placed him in handcuffs, he looked at Lee Min-jae with bitterness. "This isn't over." Lee Min-jae met his gaze calmly. "No, it ends today." The boardroom erupted into applause, not because a man had been arrested, but because the truth had finally prevailed. Joy looked at Lee Min-jae, relief washing over her. For the first time since that rainy night in Seoul, it felt as though the storm had finally passed. But neither of them realized that the greatest question still remained unanswered. What was truly in each other's hearts? The applause slowly faded. One by one, the shareholders took their seats again. The founder remained standing. He looked around the boardroom before speaking one final time. "Today, Hanseong Group has a choice. We can continue building this company on fear, or we can build it on integrity." He turned toward Lee Min-jae. "As founder and chairman emeritus, I officially recommend Lee Min-jae as the president and future chairman of Hanseong Group." The room erupted in applause once again. This time, every shareholder voted. One after another, hands were raised. The result was unanimous. Lee Min-jae had not only regained his position, he had earned the complete trust of the company. After the meeting, reporters crowded outside the headquarters. Cameras flashed nonstop. Questions flew from every direction. "President Lee, is Miss Joy your girlfriend? Are you planning to marry her? What do you say about the rumors?" Lee Min-jae looked at Joy. She nodded slightly, silently telling him to speak from his heart. He stepped toward the microphones. "I will answer only one question." The crowd fell silent. "The reports saying Joy was after my wealth, they are false. The reports saying she used me, they are false." He paused. "The truth is, when I lost everything, she was the only person who treated me like a human being. She offered me food when I had nothing. She gave me warmth when I was freezing. And she expected nothing in return." He looked directly at Joy. "If there is one person the world should admire, it is Joy Okafor." The reporters immediately turned their cameras toward Joy. She looked overwhelmed. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said softly. "My mother taught me that kindness should never depend on someone's status." Her humble response won the hearts of millions watching the live broadcast. That evening, Hanseong Group held a small celebration on the rooftop of its headquarters. The city lights of Seoul sparkled below. Joy stood quietly, admiring the skyline. Lee Min-jae walked over with 2 cups of hot tea. "Just like the first night," he said with a smile. Joy laughed. "Except this time, neither of us is standing in the rain." They stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, Lee spoke. "Joy, I've been honest with the world today. But there's one truth I haven't said yet." Joy looked at him curiously. "What is it?" He took a slow breath. "Somewhere between that rainy night, the trip to Nigeria, and watching you care for your mother, I fell in love with you." Joy's heart skipped a beat. She had imagined hearing those words many times. But now that they were real, she could barely breathe. Tears filled her eyes. She smiled through them. "I was afraid to admit it." Lee's expression softened. "Admit what?" Joy looked into his eyes. "I fell in love with you too." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lee gently reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his. Below them, Seoul continued its busy rhythm. Above them, the night sky shimmered with stars. It felt as though fate had finally completed a promise that had begun 25 years earlier with one act of kindness in Nigeria and another on a rainy street in Seoul. Their journey together was only just beginning. 6 months later, autumn painted Seoul in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The once busy roadside where Joy had sold roasted corn was decorated with colorful flowers. But the small cart was gone. In its place stood a beautiful cafe called Joy's Corner, a warm space where people from every background gathered to enjoy Nigerian and Korean dishes together. A sign at the entrance read, "Kindness has no borders." Joy had insisted that the cafe employ immigrants, international students, and people who would struggle to find work. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she often said. The cafe quickly became one of Seoul's most beloved community spaces. Across the city, Hanseong Group was thriving under Lee Min-jae's leadership. Profits had increased, but something even more important had changed. The company introduced scholarships for African students studying in South Korea. It also launched a humanitarian partnership with hospitals in Nigeria to provide medical equipment and training for healthcare workers. When reporters asked why the company had invested so heavily in these projects, Lee Min-jae smiled. Because kindness should travel farther than money. Mrs. Grace Okafor made a full recovery. For the first time in her life, she visited Seoul. As she walked into Joy's cafe, the founder of Hanseong Group stood to welcome her personally. He bowed respectfully. "Mrs. Okafor," he said warmly, "our family has waited 25 years to thank you properly." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I never expected anything in return." The founder smiled. "That is exactly why you deserve it." A few weeks later, family and friends gathered in a beautiful garden overlooking the Han River. White roses lined the walkway. Traditional Korean music blended beautifully with gentle African melodies. Joy walked down the aisle in an elegant wedding dress that reflected both her Nigerian heritage and her new life in Korea. Lee Min-jae waited with tears in his eyes. When Joy reached him, he whispered, "You still look at me the same way you did on that rainy night." Joy smiled. "And you still accept tea from strangers." Both of them laughed softly. The ceremony was simple. IT wasn't about wealth. IT wasn't about status. IT was about two families whose lives have been connected by compassion across 2 generations. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the guests erupted into applause. 1 year later, Joy and Lee stood outside Joy's Corner, watching children from different countries play together. A little girl walked up to Joy. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said shyly. "My mom told me you helped someone because he looked lonely." Joy smiled. "Yes." The little girl asked, "Wasn't scary?" Joy looked at Lee before answering. Sometimes doing the right thing is scary, but kindness is never wasted. Lee gently squeezed her hand. The little girl smiled and ran back to her mother. Joy leaned against Lee's shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had ignored you that night?" Lee smiled. "Every day. And every day I'm grateful that you didn't." Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't begin with wealth. They begin with a cup of hot tea, a warm blanket, a helping hand, or one simple decision to care for a stranger. Because kindness has a way of crossing oceans, healing old wounds, bringing families together, and creating a future no one could have imagined. Thank you for watching Afrokorea Soul Stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who believes that kindness can still change the world. See you in our next unforgettable Afrokorea Soul Story.